Welcome to the Play to Win podcast, where we talk about winning in cEDH. I'm Cam.
I'm Dylan.
And I'm Tyler.
And this week, we're joined by Tyler because we're actually going to be talking about his deck, Kinnan. If you've been around for even a second on the channel, you would know that Tyler has been playing this deck basically since Ikoria came out, right?
Forever. The entire time I could play this deck, I have.
I think this is probably one of the most played decks on the channel at this point.
It is. If you go through the Play to Win playlist, which we have all of the decks that we've ever played curated out on the playlist there, you would see that Kinnan has been the most played deck on the channel. And it also has performed exceptionally well on the channel since its inception 2 years ago here. So
yeah. So Tyler, tell us a little bit about Kinnan. Why is it good? Why has it been doing so well on the channel?
Sure. Well, let me start with why I don't get sick of it since it's been so damn long.
Okay.
I love that the deck has a relatively high amount of variance, even though you're going to end up with the same actual winning lines. The whole flipping off the top thing, much like Winota, makes it very appealing because you never quite know what you're going to get. So you have to be familiar with the lines, but also really evaluating the board position at all times. That high degree of variance also means that it has the flexibility to perform well in a lot of different pod compositions. So I feel like it has very few like really unwinnable pod matchups. So flexibility, variance keeps it interesting. I just love this deck.
I was going to ask, like, do you have a type of like matchup that you like to see or that you don't like to see when you're going into a pod and you see certain commanders?
actually, can we do something first?
Sure, yeah.
Because your commander doesn't have words on it. So can you tell us what Kinnan does?
We should start there. Yeah, we should start there.
It is a 1 green and 1 blue creature that says whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of any type that permanent produced. And then you can pay 5 and 1 green and 1 blue for a total of 7 to look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may put a non-human creature card from among them onto the battlefield, and the rest go on the bottom in a random order.
So it helps all your mana make a ton more mana, and it helps you find threats throughout your deck.
Yep, it helps you find threats. That second ability is also a very significant outlet for infinite mana that can lead to a win. So it packs a lot of punch for the command zone. It gives you a very desirable early game ability of ramping your mana very quickly. It gives you a value grind mid-range thing to do if you don't have cards in hand that you'd rather be playing. And it gives you the way to win, all right on one little card for 2 mana.
Yeah,
I think a really good thing just to remember as we're talking about this deck is that that first line is really the most powerful part. At least I think of Kinnan. It's the ability to double. I think that's the word we want to remember, is that we are doubling the amount of mana that we're getting from most mana dorks and most mana rocks.
even though it's not exactly
it's not
doubling.
double. It's +1. So Bloom Tender doesn't tap for 4.
Well, that's why I said
Yeah.
most.
It's
like there's a couple of ones that aren't going to, but like off of like our Llanowar Elves, our Elvish Mystics, our Talisman of, what's your talisman?
Creativity, I think, right?
I think that's
it.
green red.
Nope, that's creativity
that's
for sure.
blue red.
Oh,
Curiosity.
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 You're right. Yeah.
So matchups. What are the matchups that you like in this deck? What are the matchups that you don't like in this deck?
Well, this is definitely a deck that is just not capable of going as fast as Ad Nauseam. There are other versions of Kinnan that are like fast artifact combo that are trying to go much faster. I have played them. They're still really fun to play, but I'm of the opinion that usually if you're trying to beat the fastest decks running Ad Nauseam, you're just going to lose if you're trying to beat them at the speed game. So I usually don't try for that line. What that means is that we are a little scared of decks that go really fast because they can go faster than us, but we pack a really, really big suite of interaction. So that gives us some confidence to be able to play into those pods. And as long as you know what you're looking at your table, you can mulligan for that. This is also a deck that runs some light stacks itself. It's somewhere between like a mid-range deck and a stacks deck in practice most of the time, even though it is capable of turn 2 wins or turn 3 wins. But that means that when we see other stacks decks at the table, we are not that scared of them. Null Rod and Collector Oof are really devastating for this deck, but really other than that, we can operate under almost any other stacks, and we're really delighted to see them because they're slowing down our opponents who are capable of going faster than us.
Got it. So
I love that. There's 3 cards: Stony Silence, Null Rod, and Collector Oof.
Stony Silence, yeah.
Everything else is fair
you
game.
can work with, yeah.
Well, and Drannith Magistrate, but in practice, we almost always get in a Kinnan under a Drannith Magistrate because we are very obsessed with mulliganing for a turn 1 Kinnan.
Yeah,
so.
turn 1 Kinnan
Well,
seems
I mean,
really important in
every
this
deck. Yeah, every deck. I was trying to save time and not talk
Right.
about Drannith Magistrate.
Right.
Yeah, so it seems like this deck it thrives in the mid-range. Your version is trying to do mid-range stuff. You're trying to win probably like turn 4 through 6. That's like your ideal, or do you try to win earlier than that?
I mean, the ideal, so to speak, is always to win as fast as possible.
Okay, sure.
But Usually when this deck is at its best, we are outvaluing all opponents on card draw, often with cards like Consecrated Sphinx or Nezahal, because even though other decks have great mid-range plans with things like Thrasios and Rhystic Study, we can just outclass them with giant mana creatures that have extremely powerful effects that add up over time.
Okay.
And if they don't get removed very quickly, it'll be game over.
That makes sense. So maybe we should talk about some of the actual cards in this deck.
Let's get into it. So, Tyler, how do you win? Like, that's one of the most important things in any deck.
Sure. Let's talk about winning. The most important cards here are Finale of Devastation, which is going to be the actual mechanism for winning. We don't run Thessa's Oracle, which means that in this version of the deck, you cannot win at instant speed. Even if you pop an Emergence Zone, doesn't matter. You have to win with Finale of Devastation combat damage, or by bouncing all your opponent's permanents with Tidespout Tyrant loops so much that they are just prepared to scoop because you have your entire deck in your hand and they have nothing on the field and it's over. So Finale of Devastation is the actual win for X's Zillion. That is the outlet, but the way we get there is by generating infinite mana and then usually activating Kinnan until we find Thrasios, and Thrasios allows you to turn that infinite mana into drawing your entire deck, putting all your lands on the battlefield. Once you're in that position, it's very hard to lose. So the key cards then are Thrasios as the outlet, Finale of Devastation. If you have infinite colorless mana from something like Basalt Monolith, then you really want either Thrasios, as we already mentioned, or Treasure Vault as an outlet, which converts that into colored mana via treasures so that you can go find anything else. And the other big pieces here are Tidespout Tyrant and Hullbreaker Horror, both of which combo off very nicely with Kinnan, with any artifacts that are net positive mana after Kinnan's bonus, assuming you have Kinnan on the field. Those will let you go infinite with colored mana as well.
I have a couple of follow-up questions.
Yeah, Cameron, for you go first and then me.
All right. So I know you mentioned Basalt Monolith.
What are the actual ways
Is
to
there any reason why you're bringing up Basalt Monolith?
No, it's just incidentally.
That goes with my question is how do you actually make infinite mana? How do you get to the point where these outlets win you the game?
Now we know how we're trying to end the game.
That's
but
the final position.
What's the step right before that?
Right.
So if we're going the Basalt Monolith line, in which case we need Thrasios or Treasure Vault, because we can't just activate Kinnan forever with only colorless mana. Basalt Monolith taps for 4 with Kinnan because it's +1, and then has an ability that says pay 3 generic to untap it. So this just on its own generates a loop. Just Kinnan plus Basalt on their own generate a loop that generates infinite colorless mana. And then as long as we have one of those outlets or a way to find them, we are able to convert that into a victory.
That's nice. So you're saying that there is a 1-card infinite mana combo with Kinnan in the command zone.
Correct.
Now, are there other ways to make infinite mana?
Apart from those two lines, not really. We have Nyx Bloom Ancient, which with Grim Monolith does produce infinite colorless, but Nyx Bloom Ancient produces so much mana that you're already at more or less a pivotal point where you're going to be able to activate an unreasonable amount of times anyway if you have any kind of board state in terms of mana generation. So we have ways to get very close to infinite mana, like I said, with Nyx Bloom Ancient. If you've never tapped a Gaia's Cradle for 68 before, I highly recommend it. It's delightful.
That sucks. It wasn't 69?
No, couldn't get there because I don't remember the math precisely, but two Nyx Bloom Ancients.
I could tell you about all the times I couldn't get to 69 either. So.
Oh boy.
What about the Tidespout lines? Did we talk about the Tidespout lines?
We did. I'm not sure we went into detail. We said any mana rock that generates net positive once Kinnan is out. So that is any of your 0-drops in combination with any other 0-drops. If you want it to be colored mana, then you need at least one thing that generates color. But you can also get to infinite colorless if you have a Soul Ring and a Mana Vault. If you have a Mana Crypt and a Talisman, that will get you infinite colors up to how much life you have to pay for the colored mana with life. Etc. There's a lot of in-betweens, but really the vast majority of artifacts in the deck, if you have any 2 of them, you can combo off with Hullbreaker or Tidespout. So an example would be, let's say we have a Soul Ring and a Mox Opal, and at least one other artifact, so Mox Opal is on. We play any spell to get this rolling. We point the bounce from either Tidespout Tyrant or Hullbreaker Horror at the Mox Opal, tap the Mox Opal for 2 blue or green mana in response, allow it to bounce, then we tap the Soul Ring down for 3 colorless mana, cast the Mox Opal, bouncing the Soul Ring. Now we have an untapped Mox Opal, and then you just repeat. Each one bounces the other, they tap for mana, net positive, and then you end up with infinite mana.
You can substitute a lot of those mana rocks for other mana rocks. Mox Opal's a weird one because if you're bouncing Soul Ring, now you can't, like, sometimes you won't be able to tap it.
Right, you gotta have 2 other
mana
artifacts
again,
down.
right?
That's right. Yeah.
But as we go through the deck, we'll see that there's a lot of other cards that are like incidentally artifacts, a la Seed of the Cyanide kind of stuff too, that really help push you in a good direction.
Exactly. Yep.
Great. So
I got to say a la Seed of the Cyanide. I've never said that.
that was a fun little sentence you got there. Should we talk about some of the haymakers, some of the cool, fun cards that you get to play in Kinnan?
Yeah,
absolutely. Let's start off by talking about my favorite one because it is so weird and it is still not very popular even in Kinnan decks. That is Perplexing Chimera.
What is that?
Are you perplexed?
I'm
very.
This is, at this point, the namesake of the deck because I'm just so in love with it. But Perplexing Chimera is a 5-mana creature. It's a 3/3, a blue creature. And it says, whenever an opponent casts a spell, you may exchange control of Perplexing Chimera and that spell. If you do, you may choose new targets for the spell. So this is almost like a deflecting swat on a stick. It's a creature that sticks around on the board and says, anytime an opponent casts a spell, I have the opportunity to say, no, I am taking this spell, and you may have the Perplexing Chimera. So this is already good without any synergies, and the reason is that it's going to hold your opponents down from playing their most powerful spells because they just cannot afford to give you an Ad Nauseam or an Underworld Breach or something that is absolutely critical to them winning. So they almost certainly will not play it into Perplexing Chimera. If they try to remove it, you usually are happy to exchange control of Perplexing Chimera and that removal spell because when an opponent has Perplexing Chimera, they are still holding down 2 of your opponents with that same stacks piece you just played. So while they're able to defend their combo more effectively and it makes them a lot scarier, we're still pretty happy to give it away without too much fuss. But we also have Homeward Path in the deck, and Homeward Path says that each player gains control of all creatures they own. So if you trade Perplexing Chimera for a spell and then activate Homeward Path, now you have the Perplexing Chimera again, and you can now take control of another spell. So this can be pretty nutty on its own. It feels very oppressive. I usually say that Homeward Path and Perplexing Chimera and Seedborn Muse is a soft lock because you can steal 1 spell per turn, and it's usually impossible for your opponents to break through that. I've never lost a game with those pieces on the field.
Yeah, and it's not even that like they can't really bait it out either, right? Because you don't have to gain control of their spell. So if it's not like they can just like play a bad spell and then they take the Perplexing Chimera and they can do something else. No matter what, they can never cast their good thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is not Gingitastis where it just automatically takes control of that spell. You get to choose. The trigger goes on the stack every time they cast a spell, and only when it resolves do they find out whether you are choosing to gain control of that spell or not.
Right. Now, and if they had like something like 2 removal spells, that would be a way that they could get out from under this, right? But they would have to point the 1 removal spell at it, you switch control, and they have another in the hand that could kill it once
you switch control,
it.
And then you have a removal spell that you can point at whatever you want. And since the trigger has already happened for that one, they can't regain control of that spell. So you could then either choose to point that still at Perplexing Chimera to make sure they don't have it, but more likely you're going to point it at one of their juicy targets to remove something else on the board.
You always get to decide if you gain control with the Perplexing Chimera?
Yes.
Let me read this. You can only exchange control when you have it.
Yeah, when you have the Perplexing Chimera on the board, you can choose.
I think what he's saying
exchange.
is that if you can use the removal spell to hit Perplexing Chimera so that your opponent doesn't have the opportunity to have a Perplexing Chimera.
Right. At that point, you can just pass and say, yes, it hits Perplexing Chimera. Yeah. It's just, there are very few times that you're going to want to do that.
Yeah, I'm just saying that's the out. That's how you get out from under this, is having 2 removal spells.
Yeah.
That gets you out of this. But
which
besides
can be
that,
a tall order.
Which can be a tall order in
How
cEDH.
many times do you sit there and go, oh my God, all right, I need 1 bounce spell to get rid of this stacks piece and then I can win. And then the second Perplexing Chimera hits the field, it's
now
like,
you need 2.
Now I need 2 plus this.
I mean, unless you have a sacrifice outlet. So
right.
Here's why I think that doesn't work quite like that.
Okay.
You don't really need 2 removal spells the way you would with like Gingitastis, because if they exchange control of the first one, so the first one doesn't get through, which is why you would need a backup, right?
Yeah.
They are taking that and pointing the removal spell at something else now, most likely. So the player who originally had the Perplexing Chimera.
Right.
So
they being you.
being me.
So
yeah.
like I have lightning bolts, I cast lightning bolts on your Perplexing Chimera.
Right. If I decide to exchange control, you no longer want to remove the Perplexing Chimera because now you have it. You do if I have Homeward Path, maybe, but
right.
The rest of the time, if it's just Perplexing Chimera, now Perplexing Chimera is great for you because you can exchange control of it and another spell.
That's true. Like so if I cast lightning bolt on the Perplexing Chimera, you gain control of the lightning bolt, send it somewhere else, and now I have the Perplexing Chimera. You're saying I don't want to kill the Perplexing Chimera Chimera because I'll be able to use it against my other opponents.
Exactly.
Yeah, I thought that the direction we were going in is like Lightning Bolt targeting Kinnan. You can redirect it to Perplexing Chimera.
That's
And
another
it's
option.
basically like a deflecting swat that you can put into play uncounterably off a Kinnan activation.
That's kind of interesting too, that it can protect your own combos too, since your combos are permanent based. That like this is kind of a magnet that takes away from a removal spell too.
Yeah, 100%.
Now the targets have to be legal, right? Like you can't redirect an Ancient Grudge to that.
Correct. Yeah, the targets still have to be legal.
Oh, but you could still swap the Ancient Grudge and have it hit something else though.
Yeah.
Cool.
So I will say that based on how long it took us to explain this, I think hopefully it's clear that not only is it fun and useful in its own way, but it is also confusing enough that opponents frequently misplay around it because they just don't see this card that often.
Yeah, kind of helpful. Little selling point. All right, cool. Perplexing Chimera is awesome. What else? What else you got?
Let's talk about some of the haymakers that are sort of stacks pieces.
This is really the reason why I would be attracted to Kinnan, is that you get to play a lot of these really cool, big, fat creatures that sometimes you see in like the higher power of the casual side, and you don't always get to see in cEDH. So tell us about some of your favorites here, Tyler.
Sure. So Void Winnower has probably got to be one of the most recognizable. It's in most versions of this list that run big creatures, and it is just devastating for your opponents. So it's a 9-mana 11/9 that says your opponents can't cast spells with even converted mana costs, and they can't block with creatures with even converted mana costs. And 0 is even, so this shuts down an awful lot of spells.
50%.
I would say roughly 50.
Maybe roughly 50. I actually think there's probably more 1-drops and 3-drops combined in most cEDH decks than there are 2-drops and 0-drops.
I would agree.
But
75%.
it's pretty close.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
It's pretty close. So yeah, this tends to be very, very effective at shutting down the entire board. And if you're hitting it off of Kinnan, your opponents don't know it's coming. They don't have an opportunity to react to it on the stack, which ideally is the only way you want to be casting it because it's 9 freaking mana.
That's one of the most important things to note about Kinnan, besides the cheating on mana thing, is that it gets things right in play. So if people don't respond to that activation, the Void Winner is in play as soon as that activation is done being activated. So there's no chance to respond. They're stuck with those cards in their hand.
Just like Winota, yep.
Right. It's just like Winota, and no one is going to be playing around Void Winner, I would assume.
Another one we've got here is Lodestone Golem. So this is a 4-mana 5/3 that says non-artifact spells cost 1 more to cast. Lodestone Golem does hurt us too in that we run a lot of non-artifact spells that we still want to cast, but this is relying on the idea that you are usually going to have the most mana at the table in Kinnan just because of how the commander reads, and so you can usually afford these kind of tax effects a lot more than everyone else can. I would actually go as far as to say that if the deck could run a Thalia, it probably would.
Yeah. Honestly, and the extra size isn't nothing. If you're in a deck that is looking to make it into the mid game, having a big 5/3 is like helpful.
A 5/3 is not nothing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Sure does block a Timna.
Yeah, sure does.
Speaking of big stuff that puts power on the board, Coma Cosmos Serpent is another one. And this is a relatively recent ad for me, and I've been really, really liking how it plays out. This is a 6/6 that says this spell can't be countered. At the beginning of each upkeep, make a 3/3 blue serpent creature token, and then you can sacrifice another serpent, usually one of those tokens, to tap target permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated this turn, or to give Coma indestructible until end of turn. So apart from, if you play this on your turn, putting 15 power on board over 1 turn cycle, which is pretty impressive on its own, creating a lot of 3/3s gives you bodies for board presence, but we're mostly interested in the first ability that says tap target permanent, its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. This shuts down combos that rely on activated abilities once they start getting going. So I would say, like, notably Kiki Jiki combos just cannot be executed under this because they get
Dockside infinite mana combos.
Sure, Dockside, yeah, if you can point one at an Emil, yep, that will work too. So there's a couple cases like that.
Stopping things like Hermit Druid is also a big thing that I feel like Coma stops, because Hermit Druid has to be in play for a whole term cycle, so you'll get the opportunity to get the Coma in play, and then on their upkeep, tap the Hermit Druid down.
Exactly. But the other thing is, it says tap target permanent. It is not non-land permanent. So in reality, most of the time, what I end up doing with this is tapping down mana sources. And we're doing that in 2 different ways. Sometimes we're doing that in an opponent's upkeep if we think they're going for a winning turn, to constrain them on resources and make it a lot less likely that they're able to take a winning turn.
Opposition style.
But ideally, what we really want to be doing is getting all the way around to our upkeep and making potentially up to a 4th serpent at that point, and then sacking 4 serpents to tap down opponents in your upkeep when you're trying to defend a winning turn, to turn off their mana before you even try to go for the win. So it's a non-silent silence. It's a bad silence, but it has a lot of weird flexibility and a lot of very useful corner cases that I like.
It also just like gets you the table dead. Like it makes a lot of power over time pretty quickly. Even if you're not tapping stuff down, even if you're just like accumulating an army, if you're in like a locked out board state, this is really helpful.
Yeah, it is good for life pressure totaling. Or life total pressuring.
Life pressure totaling. I love it. Cool. Any other big fatties you should talk about?
Yep, we talked about these when we were talking about the combos that win the game in this deck, but Tidespot Tyrant and Hullbreaker Horror are also two cards that you are always really happy to see on a Kinnan flip. So Hullbreaker Horror and Tidespot Tyrant both, when you play a spell, you bounce something, basically, or in Hullbreaker Horror's case, you can bounce a spell off the stack. And these are just excellent at, they're sort of stacks pieces in that your opponents are going to end up having a lot of their stuff bounced, so they're great for interaction, as well as being a combo piece that'll ultimately win you the game.
Yeah, I like these because they're kind of soft wins. You can get them out when they're not actually going to be winning you the game yet, so maybe it will avoid some interaction. And then after, I mean, with Hullbreaker Horror, sometimes it's uncounterable, so that avoids interaction also. But you'll also be able to kind of control the table and make sure you get all the interaction out of people's hands before you really go for the win. So these are great at multiple stages in the game.
Absolutely.
Especially when you can end a turn, Kinnan activation, put one in play, go to your turn, untap immediately with all of your tons of mana now. So
we've got 4 more cards that I would say are kind of the big hits off of Kinnan that we love to see. First up, we'll say Seedborn Muse. Known in a lot of decks, often run in Thrasios decks because untapping and activating abilities on everyone else's turn is great. We love untapping all our stuff, and we're a big mana deck, so pretty frequently, once we have a Seedborn down, we're going to be able to activate Kinnan every turn cycle, which feels excellent.
Yeah, specifically because of that activation ability on Kinnan that you can use Seedborn Muse every single turn is really so good.
Mm-hmm. Nice. I have 14 mana on everybody's turn.
Yeah.
Consecrated Sphinx is just one of the best card advantage engines you could possibly hope for. Drawing that many cards can often be game ending, and it will put you ahead of your opponents really quickly. It absolutely demands a kill spell as quickly as possible. Otherwise, you're going to run away with the game very fast.
And like you said kind of earlier, it's really good at combating Rhystic Studies and Esper Sentinels and things like that. For every card they draw, you draw 2. You're going to be able to keep up with them pretty easily.
Absolutely.
Suck it, losers.
We also have Nezahal, which I would say is a little worse than Consecrated Sphinx, but still ends up drawing you a lot of cards, since you're drawing one for every non-creature spell your opponents cast. And Nezahal also gives you the option to discard 3 cards to exile it and return it to the battlefield, so it kind of is able to dodge removal, which makes it a really tricky piece to get rid of and also generates a ton of advantage.
And it also can't be countered, too.
If you're not getting in play with Kinnan, it also just can't be countered.
Yep. Last but not least, we have Nyxbloom Ancient. That is.
Need we say more?
Right. Triples the mana from a permanent, so with Kinnan it's triple and then +1. Nyxbloom Ancient will often get us very close to winning the game if it doesn't outright win us the game, just because the mana advantage gets so great that you can usually activate Kinnan many, many more times than you otherwise could.
It's basically infinite. Once you're at like 30, 40, 50 mana, that's basically infinite.
And like you mentioned, with cards like Gaia's Cradle in your deck and Bloom Tender, you can really make a ton of mana in one single shot.
Absolutely.
And it's got Trample, don't forget.
Oh, shit. Yeah, it does have Trample. That's
going to be my main point when I bring up all these creatures. They're good. You know what else? They're big.
They're big, yeah. Now, Tyler, what if you wanted multiple Nyxbloom Ancients in play at once?
Yeah, do you have any way to do that?
Well, we have Phantasmal Image and Phyrexian Metamorph, and we are very happy for these to copy all sorts of things. Phantasmal Image coming in as a dockside is like something you really want in Kinnan because your treasures tap for double. Phyrexian Metamorph can copy your own artifacts, so occasionally you're paying 3 to have another Mana Crypt if you're still in acceleration mode relatively early in the game.
Which is not bad. That's better than a Thran Dynamo.
Yeah. But there's tons of good targets for these. We don't really have to justify why these clones are excellent cards.
Right. Cool. Okay. So you have some win conditions. You have some big fatties that you're getting into play to help you control the board and ultimately find and win the game. How are you protecting the win?
Yeah, you also mentioned that you are scared of really fast decks. So how do you help deal with that?
How do you not die on turns 1 and 2?
We run tons of interaction.
What?
Tons of interaction.
Dude, tell
in a
more.
2-color deck with blue? That's crazy. Right. So we run a really big interaction package, and that's for 2 reasons. 1, we wanted to defend Kinnan and our combos. 2, we want to interact with decks that are able to go faster than us and make sure we can shut them down before they win. And 3, as a deck that is often in the position where we want to leave up 7 mana in between turns and activate in an end step, we have more ability than most decks to hold up mana for interaction without punishing ourselves by not having spent that resource in our main phase.
Like a Thrasios deck almost.
Like a Thrasios deck, yep.
Very similar.
Like a Thrasios stuff almost.
So I'll run through the plain old counter spells that we have just to read through them.
Yeah, read them off real quick. Jimmy.
Sure. We've got Pact of Negation, Force of Will, Force of Negation, Fierce Guardianship, Flusterstorm, Swan Song, Mental Misstep, Mana Drain, An Offer You Can't Refuse, Miscast, and Veil of Summer.
So all 0 and 1 mana besides Mana Drain, which hopefully will pay you that mana back on your next main phase or something.
Everything if only that could double too.
Only that could double.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Anything specific to note about these particular counter spells? They're just the best you got in Simic.
Pretty much, yeah. I think there's at least the miscast slot really is kind of up to you and your pods that you normally see. I could see a case for Dispel here. I could see a case for Spell Snare or Spell Pierce. I also don't run Mindbreak Trap, and it really just depends on what pod you're in, whether Mindbreak Trap feels great or just does nothing for the entire game. So that's not a risk I particularly like taking, but some people swear by it, and I think it's a perfectly reasonable include.
I feel that Mindbreak Trap and Miscast are good against the same decks, so I can see how like they can be flex slots.
Have you ever cast an Offer You Can't Refuse on one of your own spells to make 4 mana off of the treasures with
Boy,
Kinnan?
am I glad you asked. Yes. Because our treasures tap for double, there are a reasonable amount of times that we actually want to Offer You Can't Refuse ourselves in order to ramp. So if we cast a 0 mana something and then Offer We Can't Refuse it, then we are up 3 mana on that transaction. Now, we're down 2 cards, but sometimes if what you really need is the mana, that is the right play, and it has certainly happened in games that I've played plenty.
Hell yeah.
All right, I have a question. What if there's an Eidolon of Rhetoric in play and you are trying to go for the whole Breaker Horror line? What do you do to get things out of play?
Very specific situation.
Well, yeah, because that's
Do you run
also,
removal?
That's also an enchantment and a creature.
Well, Cameron, you have Hullbreaker Horror, so you can just start by bouncing the Eidolon and then cast another spell to get your loop going.
Bad example.
But if you
You
can't,
have Tidespot Tyrant, I mean.
right,
You can still bounce stuff.
it still works.
Okay. Test my bounces stuff.
You cast Tidespout, and then you have to wait until your next turn
'cause
to
it's a
go
rule of
off.
law. Okay,
It's a
okay.
rule of law creature. It's Eidolon of Rhetoric. It's fucking you up.
All right. Well, in terms of the ways that we deal with problem permanence, we've got Chain of Vapor, which needs no explanation.
Actually, I do want to say extra good in this deck because when it's being used as a ritual, it makes you even more mana.
Yeah, your rocks make so much mana. If you bounce your own rocks to sack your lands to do it, you can make even more mana with them. If you need that extra
You don't
mana.
storm off, though, so
Yeah.
I can't imagine that comes up as much.
Well, I
but
think
you
you're right
can do
that
it.
that maybe more than your typical deck, we might start off by Chain of Vaporing our own thing and then sacking a land to copy it and then pointing it where we actually want it to go. So that's Chain of Vapor. We have March of Swirling Mist, which has really overperformed for me, I think. Having the potential to get rid of multiple pieces in one go, even if it's only for a turn, is often just all we need to be able to close out the game.
Yeah, not just you. That card is overperformed for everybody in cEDH.
Great card.
Yep.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love March.
We've got Nature's Claim, plenty of troublesome artifacts and enchantments that we got to get rid of.
Like Eidolon of Rhetoric.
Yep. Though honestly, we kind of like Eidolon in this deck. I don't know, Cam. If we can just activate all day, every day, and everyone else has held the one spell, we're not sad.
Nah, good point.
Pongify is in here too. I used to run more single target removal, rapid hybridization, namely, but I've cut down on it mostly just because I feel that March of Swirling Mist is better than the second of those right now. But still like Pongify. We run Force of Vigor in part because we have a lot of card advantage, so exiling the green card is not usually a big deal, and hitting 2 things feels great. We run Cyclonic Rift because Cyclonic Rift is great, and much like the other instances where we are holding up 7 mana and everyone thinks we're going to activate Kinnan and then we instead overload Cyclonic Rift, you can really afford to hold it up and do it at just the right moment. So
Yeah, we've been gotten by
overperforms in this
that.
deck.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Then let's talk about 3 pieces of interaction with channel abilities, which are great because they're uncounterable. The first one is Moonsnare Prototype. So this is a weird card from Kamigawa, the most recent one, that says tap an untapped artifact or creature you control to add 1 colorless mana. It's a 1 blue mana artifact, but it also says channel for 4 and 1 blue. You can put the owner of target non-land permanent puts it on the top or bottom of their library. So this ends up being more or less a submerge that can't be countered, and it's much more expensive, but in this deck we often have the mana and the flexibility to play it as an artifact when you need ramp on turn 1 or hold it as interaction later in the game. It makes it a great card in the slot.
Yeah, this seems like a perfect Kinnan inclusion right here.
Kinnan still doubles that mana, so it makes that.
Yeah, so it taps for 2 colorless. We also have, of course, Boseiju and Otawara.
Oh, the best cards from 2022.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
These are both excellent because they come in untapped and tap for our callers, but you can hold them to either destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land. In the case of Otawara, return an artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand.
Also gives you more of a reason to not have to play like rapid hybridization.
Absolutely.
I'm sure that you play more creatures.
I have Gilded Drake and Rexage, which are still kind of interaction.
Yeah, talk about those two.
Oh, yeah.
Yep, we've got two pieces. Reclamation Sage, which we can hit off of Kinnan and is just, good old-fashioned destroy target artifact or enchantment. But when we hit it off of Kinnan, it's effectively uncounterable, so always a good include. And then Gilded Drake, which is a real pet card of mine, if I'm honest. We love being able to steal commanders, and particularly since we run so many bounce effects and clone effects, the odds that we can bounce it and play another Gilded Drake are reasonably high. So this is great for stealing Drannith Magistrates and stealing commanders most of the time.
Isn't it great to have like a really powerful pet card?
Yeah.
Like a lot of times people's pet cards are like something that's like really like lower power, and they're like, oh, I'm just trying to fit it in. Oh yeah, my pet card's ad nauseum. I just try to fit ad nauseum into every deck.
Man, I mean, I just played too many overly competitive cards back in my early casual days. So like maybe 7 years ago now, when I first got Gilded Drake for a whopping $45 at the time and put it in a casual deck of mine, and my friend said, 2 mana to do that? That's such bullshit. My heart grew 3 sizes that day.
Yeah, Gilded Drake definitely costed extremely cheaply. Very good with Kinnan being able to find it off of an activation. It's a great card.
So how do we find these pieces that we need? We talked about a lot of very important cards that we need to assemble, like the Avengers.
So let's talk about tutors and card advantage engines. We've got crop rotation. A lot of decks run this anyway, but we have a higher than normal amount of targets that we really care about with this. It's not just a second copy of Gaia's Cradle as it is in many decks.
You like utility lands? Name 4 utility lands.
I love it. So with crop rotation, the others that we're really interested in getting, Homeward Path, if we are going for the Perplexing Chimera lock, is absolutely devastating. Treasure Vault is also an infinite mana outlet that turns our colorless mana into treasures that we can use to activate Kinnan. And sometimes we want to go get an Emergence Zone so that we can go over top of the stack and try and do dirty, nasty things while our opponents still have an ad nauseum 5 spells down on the stack or something.
Yeah, Treasure Vault, I think, was such a great add to this deck, being able to turn your infinite colorless mana into treasures really easily without any being able to interact or anything like that. It's a super great add.
You only named 3. You have to name 4.
Oh, sorry. What was it? Gaia's Cradle, Treasure Vault?
You didn't say Gaia's Cradle.
Oh, say Gaia's Cradle.
Gaia's Cradle. We do still want Gaia's Cradle.
Yeah, there we go. Gaia's Cradle's a good card.
Certainly. We've also got Mystical Tutor and Worldly Tutor. These do serve different purposes in this deck. Mystical Tutor obviously is just getting you the spell you need when you need it. But Worldly Tutor behaves a little differently in this deck because Kinnan looks at the top 5 cards of the library. So it is often a great play to cast your Worldly Tutor and then activate Kinnan once that's on top of the library. Your opponents are usually going to see that coming, so hopefully they know to counter it. But it basically makes it 8 mana, go get any creature in your deck and put it into play. Without the opportunity to counter the creature, so they have to counter the Worldly Tutor. In terms of other creature tutors, we run Eldritch Evolution and Summoner's Pact. The vast majority of the time with Eldritch Evolution, we are using that to get a utility creature, either a Gilded Drake or sometimes a Reclamation Sage, or one of our Femage or our Phyrexian Metamorph, because we're usually converting mana Dorks into one of those creatures. But sometimes if we have a Rexage or something a little bigger on mana value, then we'll go get Seedborn Muse, which is what we really want.
Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of times you see Eldritch Evolution going to get like a Grand Abolisher or a Thassa's Oracle, like a way to try to close out the game, but it's operating just a little bit differently in this deck, where it's not closing out the game, but it's still going to get you to a point where you can get really close to closing out.
Absolutely. We also run Summoner's Pact, even though it's a little expensive when you do have to pay for it. Seedborn Muse is absolutely worth paying 9 ultimately in this deck, so we are not unhappy if we are pretty sure we can get away with resolving a Seedborn Muse to cast a Summoner's Pact in main phase, get a Seedborn Muse, and play it with the knowledge that we can probably activate Kinnan 3 times and then still pay for our Summoner's Pact.
This can also get Thrasios, which is a helpful piece that will allow you to win the games in many points.
Yep.
Having Summoner's Pact be able to go for value or for combo piece, I think that's what makes this card really great in this deck.
Yeah, absolutely key. Next we got Moonsilver Key, which is a weird one since we're no longer really on artifact combo in this version of the deck, but this is a 2-mana artifact that lets us pay 1 and sack it to search for an artifact card with a mana ability or a basic land and put it in hand. We like this because we can go get Basalt, which is the 1-card infinite colorless mana combo with Kinnan, which is what we're going to get most of the time. But in edge cases, we can also go get Moonsnare Prototype, which has a mana ability but acts as removal. So weirdly, this can go tutor uncounterable creature or artifact or enchantment removal, which is kind of neat.
Funny as fuck.
Yeah, it's nice when your tutors are flexible like that. Being able to get multiple different things is what makes them so powerful, I think.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk card advantage. Other than Nezahal and Consecrated Sphinx, which are certainly our favorites, we're running some more typical card advantage cards as well. We've got Mystic Remora, we've got Ristic Study, and we've got Sylvan Library, all phenomenal enchantments that we're really happy to see early in the game in particular. We're also running Ledger Shredder, which I have to say is kind of close to on the chopping block. It is not our best card advantage piece, but it also becomes a big body, and over the course of a game, it can do a lot of work.
You're not really using your graveyard much in this deck, so the actual looting ability isn't as powerful as it might be in like an Underworld Breach deck, right?
Yeah, it is not the best deck for Ledger Shredder, for sure.
No, but you're a blue deck that does not have card advantage, like
in the command zone. Exactly.
Card draw in the command zone.
Even though this isn't really card draw, it's just really card selection, but still. It's really
it still gives you the ability to pick up a card from the top of your library and put it into your hand.
Right.
We're also running Ponder, which is probably the best single mana blue cantrip-ish spell. Not our favorite, but sometimes you have to keep a hand that has a Ponder if you're going down to 5 or something like that. And we have Brainstorm. And Brainstorm is very interesting in this deck because it's already a playable cantrip in the vast majority of decks. But if you find yourself with one of your big creatures in hand that you really don't want to hard cast, putting a Kinnan activation on the stack and then responding to it with Brainstorm. If the Brainstorm resolves, is going to allow you to put that creature on top of the deck and then flip it off with Kinnan, and then put those 5 cards on the bottom of your library. So much like fetches are great with Brainstorm, this gives you the ability to take a great creature from your hand, get it onto the battlefield, and then put 2 cards from your hand that you didn't want on the bottom of your library instead of the top, which feels really good.
It's like Sneak Attack. It makes Kinnan into a Sneak Attack, one-time shot.
An 8-mana Sneak Attack.
8-mana Sneak Attack.
Git Probe is half interaction, half card draw, but this is just something that you run if you want to take up that extra slot and make sure you're able to get an extra card and see what interaction awaits you in your opponent's hand.
That's the first time I've ever heard Git Probe be called interaction.
Yeah,
but that's literally what it is.
Yeah, it kind of is.
You're interacting.
It's sort of I don't know.
Yeah,
halfway.
It's much more powerful when you play over spell table than when you play in person.
Is that because they show the whole table?
Yeah, I think people are more inclined to show the whole table over spell table just because you just don't have to deal with like the clicks and all that jazz.
Let me make the case a little bit, though. I do think the thing with Git Probe is that in the sense that politics and persuading your opponents that one of your opponents is more powerful and they should be focused on them is really important. I think Git Probe is very good for that. If you're good at selectively deciding what information to share, you can really use that to try and shift focus, and everyone knows you've just seen that hand, so they're going to listen to you.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you have any ways to recur cards from your graveyard?
Not many. Even though green is a pretty good recursion color, we don't need that much recursion because a lot of our game plan doesn't revolve around just a couple creatures. We have some redundancy, but we run Noxious Revival and Endurance. Endurance is really important in this deck because once it was printed, we could reduce the cost of the deck by about $7,000 by eliminating Time Twister.
It's helpful.
Yeah, which is great.
Boom, budget right there.
Because with Endurance, you can shuffle your own graveyard and Endurance into your library. So if you are already on the infinite mana drawing your deck with Thrasios plan, this allows you to recycle and reuse cards that you may need from your graveyard to get out of sticky situations with weird interaction. It doesn't come up terribly often, but because Endurance is also free most of the time and can interact with opponents to stop Thassa's Oracle wins, it definitely deserves the slot.
Yeah, and I was going to say the being able to stop Thassa's Oracle wins is like an extra big bonus, like the number one. Thassa's Oracle and Underworld Breach. The fact that it stops us both is like a really big reason why Endurance just gets like a couple extra boosts. Does a couple different things, probably like not the most effective, efficient way, but it does, since it does so many different things, it's a great include in this deck.
Absolutely.
We're now going to talk about a list of cards that see play in just about every single green deck, but are especially nuts in this one.
We're talking about Mana Dorks and Mana Rocks, and that is what Kinnan is all about. This is kind of our meat and potatoes. We run more or less a normal package that you would see in any deck. I'll mention for you what the ones that are a little weird are at the end here. We have Mana Crypt, Lotus Petal, Mox Diamond.
I'm shocked.
Elvish Spirit Guide, Mox Opal, Mox Amber, Chrome Mox, Springleaf Drum, Felware Stone, Soul Ring, Mana Vault, Copy Artifact, Talisman of Curiosity, Arcane Signet, Grim Monolith, Basalt Monolith, Priest of Titania, Bloom Tender, Birds of Paradise, Elvish Mystic, Finhorn Elves, and Llanowar Elves.
They all make infinite sense to me in this deck.
In this deck, absolutely. I think most cEDH decks won't necessarily run Springleaf Drum, but in this deck, it is just worth it because tapping for 2 makes it so much better. Grim Monolith is also not always an include in every deck, but with Nyx Blue Ancient, it turns into infinite mana, and just tapping for 4 already makes it a whole bunch better. Similarly, because we care about our big mana rocks so much, Copy Artifact is a great include. It can copy one of our opponent's artifacts, so if someone else gets down a Soul Ring or a Mana Crypt, we can benefit from that, as well as being able to copy anything on your own board if that's what you need.
It's a ritual, which is funny.
Yeah.
Do you ever copy whatever Phyrexian Metamorph copied?
Well, I think that's come up. If Phyrexian Metamorph comes down as a dockside, then casting a Copy Artifact to make an artifact dockside is pretty darn appealing.
Hell yeah, I love that.
This is a treasure-hungry deck. Just to note, too, that Elvish Spirit Guide does not double mana because it's not tapping, so Kinnan does not add extra mana for that. But because a turn 1 Kinnan is so important to our game plan, Elvish Spirit Guide is still worth the slot.
Sweet. We've talked about a ton of fucking cards.
We're not done.
You have any lands in your deck?
Yeah.
Let's talk about your lands. So the spell we've
No
talked about
lands
a lot
in the
of
deck,
we've
no.
talked about a lot of spells. I feel like we got to be coming up on land time.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All right, so we've got a lot of lands that are just what you would see in any green-blue deck. Fetch lands, Yavimaya Coast, Gemstone Caverns, that sort of thing. So we're not going to talk about any of those, but the ones that do have a special role, we'll go through here. So Gaia's Cradle is pretty obvious. This is great in creature-based decks, and this is a creature-based deck. We search for it with crop rotation, and because Gaia's Cradle is so good, and we are a low-color deck, a 2-color deck to be specific, we also run Minamo School at Water's Edge.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Doesn't come up that often, but if you have both of these out, the ability to tap Gaia's Cradle and then pay essentially 2 to untap it with Minamo and then tap it again can be a significant source of mana generation.
Or you could attack with Kinnan and then untap Kinnan.
You could. We also run both of the artifact lands available in these colors, Seat of the Synod and Tree of Tales.
Tell me about these cards. You're not afraid of Dockside. You're feeding Dockside extra.
We are afraid of Dockside, and we are also afraid of Collector Oof. These are devastating for us. But in my estimation, which seems to be an unpopular opinion, the value of turning on Mox Opal turn 1 is worth the risk. So we run a very high density of artifacts already, and running these pushes us into the position where sometimes we can have a Mox Opal that is live on our very first turn. If we have something like Tree of Tales into Soul Ring with a Mox Opal gives us 3 available mana to maybe play a Rhystic Study or something like that. Also being able to turn on that Mox Opal really increases our chances of a turn 1 Kinnan, and that, again, is just what the deck wants to do.
Yeah, Kinnan uses extra mana so well anyway to turn on your fast mana even quicker and make it even faster. I feel like you always have a mana outlet. So it's not like you're going to have a traditional ramp deck problem where you run out of stuff to do. There's always something to do.
And you were already going to give Dockside 1 billion treasures anyway in this deck. So
Right,
what
yeah.
the hell?
Yeah, what's the
That's-
difference?
What the hell are
Why even pretend?
sometimes 1 or 2 more? Yeah.
Sure. We also run Emergence Zone. Plenty of decks run this. It's just great to be able to play things at instant speed and go over top of the stack. It's not necessarily as important in this deck as it is in many others when our plan is usually to just kind of win in the mid-range. But it's nice to have, and because we're in 2 colors, we can afford to run more utility lands than most decks can.
This is Play to Win's January 2023 card of the month.
And Emergence Zone is good as fuck.
Holy fucking shit it is.
Sure is. We also have Urza's Saga, which I would say is a little better in this deck than most decks just because the artifacts that it gets are likely to tap for 1 extra mana. So we are very happy to see Urza's Saga early.
Can this find what's that key? How much mana is the key?
Key's 2 mana.
Moonsilver Key is 2 mana. Yep, so we
Nuts.
can't
All right,
find
never
that.
mind. That would have been good.
Yeah, we're usually just finding Mox Opal or Mox Amber or sometimes
Like a
Soul
Soul
Ring or
Ring,
Mana
maybe.
Crypt. Yep,
This
any
should
of
be good
those.
enough.
And finally, we run Cephalid Coliseum. This is another utility land that I would say not all decks run, but because we're in 2 colors, it feels appropriate. If you have Threshold, you can pay blue and sacrifice it to have target player draw 3 cards, then discard 3. So this serves the dual purpose of allowing you to dig a little deeper into your deck if you're in a really desperate position, or if someone has failed to notice that it is on your board and goes for a Thassa's Oracle win, if you let the consult resolve, then activate Cephalid Coliseum, targeting that player, they will lose to the draw before their Oracle goes off. Almost never happens, but boy, is it gratifying to have the option.
It's threatening there. It's probably not going to happen often because people aren't going to go for the win when it's there, but it being there stops them from going from that a lot.
It's like a stacks piece.
almost. Yeah, it can be.
A very bad one, but
A
yeah.
very bad one. But it also is a blue land that is untapped right away. Like it's the weak part of it. Like at worst, it's still a land that's
Right.
untapped. It's still good.
Nothing else in your deck is utilizing your life total. So like even the 1 damage that it deals to you,
The floor is so high.
who cares? So who would you recommend this deck to?
I think players who really don't want to play ad nos or all-in strategies and want a lot of flexibility and variety of gameplay are going to love this deck. It feels very, very powerful, and it can hang in a lot of different kind of pods. So if you don't need a deck that is tuned to one specific meta, but you play with a lot of different groups, I think it's great for that because you can go into a blind meta and feel pretty confident that it's going to be able to hang at the table. I also think anyone who really loves the casual roots of playing big creatures that are just huge haymakers that do extremely powerful effects. If you like that feeling, then it's very much the deck for you.
So you Timmies out there that haven't tried cEDH yet.
Yeah, this deck can definitely get away with them. A lot of other decks probably couldn't get away with playing big cards like Consecrated Sphinx. They just wouldn't be able to get them in play often enough, but this deck can really manipulate that, and is such a good ramp deck. Like if you like Tron or you like just like green ramping strategies, this is like the best cEDH deck that does those big mana strategies, I think.
Do you have anyone that you wouldn't recommend this deck for?
I mean, me personally, no. I just love the deck so much. I would tell anyone to play it. But if you really like total stack strategies, this is not that. Even though it runs some stacks cards, don't be fooled. It is trying to ramp early and then hang into the mid game and make the game go long. That is usually the way we win. But it is not a stacks deck, even though it has some stacks cards. So if stacks is your preferred strategy, this is not it for you. If you cannot stand to be entirely shut down by some cards like Collector Oof or something like that, this may not be the deck for you.
If you don't like getting your commander removed.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, also you run some weird cards because it is a 2-color deck, and in 2-color decks you are in the position where card quality in just 2 colors is such that you don't get to run some of the really fun cards that you can run in all your 4-color decks. So if that's important, I guess don't play 2-color decks.
I got a question. What about like notable weaknesses? What's like one of the issues with this deck? Do you think that it could either be solved with like a future printing of another card, or just maybe with the meta? Like what's like an issue that you run into with this deck?
Besides Collector Oof and
besides
artifact
Collector Oof. I know you
off.
just kind of said that, but is there anything else that you're like it could use a little bit more card draw, a little bit more this or that? Is there anything?
Yeah, we definitely wish it had more card draw. That would be nice. Like you're in blue, so like you have access to one of the best card draw colors, but you're missing like the massive game winning card draw spells like Ad Nauseam, like Peer into the Abyss and Necropotence to a lesser extent for sure. I would also say that because we're in green blue, our tutoring ability is not great. We have great creature tutors, which is the most important kind of tutor for this deck, really. But that's about it. Not being in black just means you don't have access to any of the unconditional tutors that can find the right thing at the right time. So that can be a bit challenging.
Nice.
What cards did you purposefully not put in your deck?
Yeah, any notable excludes?
Versus other Kinnan decks, or just in general?
Yeah, either one.
In general,
anything
yeah.
that sticks out in your head right now.
Like, why didn't you put... I don't have a good fuck. Shit. That would have been funny if I would have had like
A thought. Or
Like,
like something
yeah,
to say.
like,
How do
why-
people do that? Think stuff and just say it.
Why isn't Muldrifter in this deck?
So I would say stuff that feels obvious that could slot in here are a lot more artifact tutors, because Basalt Monolith is an infinite mana combo. There are versions of Kinnan that run a lot more artifact tutors and are much more all in on the artifact plan, and this isn't one of them. That you kind of can have your cake and eat it too with Kinnan to a limited extent, but I think for me, Moonsilver Key is the right amount of going to find that artifact, and the rest of the time I'm much happier with Hullbreaker Horror Tidespout Tyrant combo. So that's the direction I leaned, but you don't have to. There's certainly much faster versions of Kinnan that are just trying harder to find Basalt Monolith faster and run more outlets for it.
Transmute Artifact, I feel like, is a notable one that I feel like has been in your list in the past and maybe isn't anymore.
Yep,
right?
yep,
That
exactly.
kind of is that vein.
There's also creature lines with Pemim's Aura and Freed from the Real that will also generate infinite mana. I exclude those because you can't really find those two pieces in the same turn. A creature that generates the mana you need, like Birds of Paradise, and the aura to enchant it. So if you have to wait until you can untap with that creature and it's no longer summoning stick to enchant it, that means you're waiting a turn cycle. And they're pretty easy to interact with by just killing the creature or any number of other things. So I don't like those lines quite as much, so I don't run those creature-heavy versions.
Enchantments are hard to find in Simic, honestly.
Enchantments are hard to
really
find. Yeah,
Simic,
exactly.
right?
No, you really don't. And they get hit by all of the negate counter spells.
And Isochron Scepter, that was the one that you played at some point. That was a combo that you're no longer including, right?
Yep, Dramatic Reversal and Isochron Scepter is certainly a great combo, but where the deck is now, I just think you have enough ways to get infinite mana that don't require you to run cards that usually don't feel great on their own if you don't have both pieces, that they just don't feel necessary.
Speaking of cards that are dead on their own, Thassa's Oracle is another one that sometimes people assume should go in decks that are drawing their whole deck, but you're not playing Thassa's Oracle here.
Yeah, Thassa's Oracle would be fine in this deck. You just don't really want to draw it, and you don't especially want to flip into it either unless you're at the moment of winning.
Ha! Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that's really awkward. Oops. All right. Well, there goes like my win condition then.
Sure. I mean, it's always a may, right? You don't have to reveal a creature from those top 5, but I still think Thassa's Oracle just doesn't need to be in here because it doesn't really have a hard time closing out the game once you get to infinite mana as it is.
That was a lot of Kinnan talk.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Why were you sorry?
Yeah,
we were literally like, could you please come over and do a Kinnan deck tech? And then you did the deck tech, and then you said, I'm sorry.
I don't know how long they're supposed to be. Maybe this means too much editing.
This is the
No,
perfect
this is
length.
great. This is great. length.
How do we wrap it up? What was the last thing that we said?
Wow, Kinnan. What a deck.
Wow, marvelous. What a spectacular deck that was.
Wow, what a marvelous deck.
Thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to support us directly, you can do so on Patreon, like our $100 patrons.
Demon of Razgriz and Baby G-Bus.
If you want to pick up any of our merch, you can do so at our website, playtowinmtg.com.
If you'd like to support us at no additional cost to you, check out our affiliate links down below.
You want to tell people to follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for more content?
No, that's the antithesis of what I like. No, someone else say that.
That's why we gave it to you. If you want to catch more content, you can do so on TikTok, Instagram, or Twitter.
Thank you for watching.
See you next time.
Should we shout out our $50 patrons?
Yeah, let's shout them out.
Justin,
Eli Rich D,
Jason Perkins,
Man Solo,
Nicola Marakovic,
Steven Schlichty,
That Green Guy,
Plantain Jackson,
Isaiah Berlisky,
Michael Lyon,
Pedro,
Byron Wang,
Windwave,
C,
Khwaja A. Hamid,
Jacob Depp,
CZ,
Michael Blue,
Jan Wildfang,
Sleepy Jarvis,
Thomas Bueno,
Swampy McGee,
Lauren Connell,
David Nelson,
Vinny Bianca,
Jormags,
James Noon. The one thing I want though is like I said, I want you to get the altar art, like an image of it or something.
I held it up earlier.
Oh, did you? I'm sorry. Okay, then you're probably
Tyler, who? I'm a fucking owl.
Tell us about this. What's this?
Oh, that is an altar that I commissioned from Mike Sad from Playing with Power, who is an awesome guy and a phenomenal artist, and I am so grateful. He did a great job on it.
Who is this?
This is Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke.
Line. Like in a play.
Merch. He asked for a line, like in a play.
So weird.
I fucking love that bit. Line.